The elementary school auditorium smelled like floor polish and anticipation. I clutched my purse in my lap, scanning the rows of folding chairs for a decent seat where I could actually see my granddaughter Emma perform in her third-grade production of The Wizard of Oz. At 73 years old, my eyesight wasn't what it used to be, and I'd driven 2 hours from my small apartment in Riverside just to watch her be a munchkin for probably 3 minutes of stage time. But that's what grandmothers do. We show up. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The auditorium was filling quickly with parents wielding smartphones like weapons, jockeying for the best angles to capture their children's theatrical debuts. I felt invisible as they brushed past me, these younger families with their matching athleisure outfits and their easy confidence. I was wearing my best cardigan, the cream-colored one I'd owned for 15 years, over a floral dress I'd found at Goodwill. My shoes were sensible flats because my knees couldn't handle anything with a heel anymore. I knew I looked exactly like what I was, an elderly woman living on a fixed income, trying her best to stay relevant in her family's life. I finally spotted an empty seat in the 4th row, not too far back but not so close that I'd crane my neck. As I settled into the hard plastic chair, a woman slid into the seat beside me. She was probably in her mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that screamed professional success. Her burgundy leather briefcase looked like it cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She had that polished appearance of someone who spent serious money on haircuts and knew exactly which skincare products actually worked. "Packed house tonight," she said pleasantly, offering me a warm smile as she adjusted her briefcase under her seat. "Always is for these school shows," I replied, grateful for the friendly gesture. "My granddaughter is one of the munchkins. Emma Castellano. Do you have a child performing?" "My nephew," she said. "He's the Cowardly Lion. I'm his godmother, and his parents are both stuck at work, so I'm the designated family representative tonight." She extended her hand. "I'm Victoria Chun, but please call me Vicky." "Margaret Foster," I said, shaking her hand. Her grip was firm and confident. "It's nice of you to come support him when his parents couldn't make it." "Family is family," Vicky said with a shrug. "Sometimes we step in where we're needed." Something about the way she said it made me like her immediately. There was a groundedness to her despite the expensive clothes and professional polish. We chatted easily as the auditorium continued to fill, discovering we both loved old movies and had a shared obsession with crime podcasts. She was funny and self-deprecating, telling me about how she'd accidentally worn 2 different shoes to work last week because she'd gotten dressed in the dark. "What do you do for work?" I asked, genuinely curious about this put-together woman who seemed so down to earth. "I'm a family law attorney," Vicky said. "Divorces, custody cases, that sort of thing. It's not always pleasant, but someone has to help people navigate those difficult transitions." "That must be emotionally draining," I said, "dealing with families falling apart." "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I also get to help people find their way to better situations. I've seen a lot of people discover themselves after leaving relationships that were slowly destroying them." She paused, studying me with intelligent dark eyes. "Sorry, I tend to get philosophical about my work." "Occupational hazard." Before I could respond, my daughter-in-law Cassandra appeared at the end of our row, her expression already pinched with irritation. She was wearing designer jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost what I spent on groceries for a month. Her highlighted hair was perfectly blown out, and her makeup looked professionally applied. At 38, she was beautiful in that calculated way that required significant time and money to maintain. "Margaret," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone she always used with me, like she was speaking to someone slightly slow. "I saved you a seat in the back row. Why are you sitting up here?" "The back was too far," I said simply. "I wanted to be able to see Emma properly." Cassandra's eyes flickered to Vicky, and something shifted in her expression. It was subtle, just a slight widening of her eyes and a tightening around her mouth, but I caught it. Then her face smoothed into her practiced social smile. "Well, you should have told me you needed to sit closer," Cassandra said, though we both knew that was a lie. She deliberately put me in the worst seat in the house because that's what she always did. I could have arranged something. "I'm fine here," I said firmly. This nice woman and I were just having a lovely conversation. Cassandra's smile became even more brittle. How wonderful. Well, I'll be sitting with the other parents up front if you need anything. She shot one more glance at Vicky, and I could have sworn I saw something like fear flicker across her face before she turned and walked away. Friend of yours? Vicky asked neutrally once Cassandra was out of earshot. Daughter-in-law, I said, trying to keep the weariness out of my voice. We have a complicated relationship. I'm familiar with those, Vicky said with a knowing smile. Family dynamics are rarely simple. The lights dimmed, saving me from having to explain further. As the curtain rose and the children began their enthusiastic if somewhat off-key performance, I found myself relaxing for the first time in weeks. There was something comforting about sitting next to Vicky, this stranger who'd shown me more genuine warmth in 15 minutes than my daughter-in-law had in 10 years. Emma was adorable as a munchkin, singing with such earnest concentration that my heart swelled with pride. I pulled out my ancient flip phone to try to take a photo, but the zoom function had never worked properly. Vicky noticed my struggle and leaned over. Would you like me to take some photos with my phone? She whispered. I can text them to you afterward. Would you mind? I whispered back, grateful. This old thing barely works anymore. Not at all, she said warmly, and proceeded to take several excellent shots of Emma's scenes. During intermission, while parents rushed to the lobby for overpriced baked goods, Vicky showed me the photos and helped me set up a basic email account on my phone so she could send them to me. You're very kind, I told her as we worked through the technical steps. Most people don't have patience for teaching old dogs new tricks. You're not old, Vicky said firmly, and you're clearly eager to learn. That counts for a lot. She paused, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Can I ask you something personal, Margaret? Of course. Your daughter-in-law, Cassandra, is she married to someone named Derek Castellano? My stomach dropped. Yes. Do you know them? Vicky's expression became carefully neutral, the kind of professional mask I imagined she wore in courtrooms. I know of Derek through business circles. Real estate developer, right? That's him, I said, wondering why this successful attorney would know my son. Derek had done well for himself, building custom homes for wealthy clients in Orange County. He and Cassandra lived in a 5,000-square-foot house in a gated community, the kind of place where even the landscaping had landscaping. Small world, Vicky said softly, but something in her tone suggested she was thinking things she couldn't say out loud. The second act began before I could pursue the question further. But throughout the rest of the performance, I found myself stealing glances at Vicky, wondering about the strange expression that had crossed her face when she'd made the connection between me and Cassandra. When the show ended and proud parents flooded toward the stage to collect their young performers, Vicky gathered her things and turned to me with another one of those warm smiles. It was truly lovely meeting you, Margaret, she said, pulling a business card from her purse. I mean that sincerely. If you ever need anything, or if you just want to grab coffee and talk about true crime podcasts, please don't hesitate to call me. I took the card, noting the elegant letterhead. Victoria Chun, partner, Chun and Associates Family Law. There was a string of credentials after her name that I didn't fully understand, but that clearly indicated she was very good at what she did. Thank you for making tonight so pleasant, I said honestly. And for the photos. That was incredibly thoughtful. Take care of yourself, Margaret, Vicky said, and there was something weighted in the way she said it, as if she were trying to communicate something more than just a polite farewell. After she left, I made my way toward the backstage area where parents were collecting their children. Emma spotted me and came running over, her munchkin costume slightly askew and her face flushed with excitement. Grandma, did you see me? Did I do good? You were absolutely perfect, I told her, pulling her into a hug. The best munchkin in the whole land of Oz. Cassandra appeared then, her expression tight as she placed a possessive hand on Emma's shoulder. Emma, sweetie, go get your things from your cubby. Grandma needs to head home now. But I wanted to show her my dressing room, Emma protested. Not tonight, Cassandra said firmly. Grandma has a long drive ahead of her. It was only 7:30. I'd planned to take Emma out for ice cream after the show, something I'd mentioned to Derek when he called to tell me about the performance. But Cassandra was already steering Emma away, And I knew from experience that arguing would only make things worse. "I'll see you soon, sweet girl," I called after Emma, who looked back at me with disappointment. Derek appeared from somewhere in the crowd of parents, looking harried and checking his phone even as he was supposed to be celebrating his daughter's performance. At 52, my son had his father's broad shoulders and my late husband's tendency to let work consume him. He'd been a sweet, thoughtful boy once, but somewhere along the way to building his successful business, he'd lost the ability to see past his own concerns. "Hey, Mom," he said distractedly, giving me a one-armed hug while still looking at his phone. "Thanks for coming. Emma was great, wasn't she?" "She was wonderful," I agreed. "I was hoping to take her for ice cream if that's okay." "Not tonight," Cassandra interjected smoothly, appearing at Derek's elbow.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
It's a school night, and Emma needs to get to bed at a reasonable hour. Plus, we have that early appointment tomorrow, remember, Derek? My son nodded automatically, clearly not remembering any such appointment but unwilling to contradict his wife in public. "Yeah, sorry, Mom. Maybe next time." There was always a next time that never quite materialized. I'd learned not to push because pushing only resulted in longer stretches between the rare occasions I was allowed to see my granddaughter. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "I should get on the road anyway. The drive back to Riverside is long after dark." "You're still in that apartment?" Cassandra asked, and there was that tone again, the one that made everything she said sound like a criticism. "Derek, didn't you tell me your mother was going to look into one of those senior living communities?" "I like my apartment," I said quietly. "I'm not ready for assisted living. I just think it would be safer," Cassandra pressed. "At your age, living alone in that neighborhood. What if something happened?" The neighborhood was perfectly safe. Working class, sure, but safe. What Cassandra really meant was that she found it embarrassing that her mother-in-law lived in a modest apartment complex, instead of a nice retirement community, where she could be conveniently tucked away and forgotten. "I'm managing just fine," I said, my voice carrying more edge than I'd intended. Derek finally looked up from his phone, sensing the tension. "Mom, we're not trying to push you into anything. Cass is just worried about you." Cassandra wasn't worried about me. Cassandra was worried about how it looked that her mother-in-law lived in a rundown apartment and drove a 15-year-old Honda with a dented bumper. But I'd learned long ago that Derek would always take his wife's side, would always accept her version of reality over mine. "I appreciate the concern," I said, gathering my purse. "I'll call you next week, Derek." As I walked toward the parking lot alone, passing clusters of families laughing and planning their post-show celebrations, I felt the familiar weight of isolation settle over my shoulders. This was my life now. Brief, supervised visits with my granddaughter, strained interactions with my son, and the constant subtle hostility of a daughter-in-law who saw me as an embarrassment to be managed. My car was parked at the far end of the lot under a broken streetlight. As I fumbled with my keys, I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Cassandra approaching, her expression no longer carefully controlled but openly hostile. "I saw you talking to that woman," she said without preamble. "Victoria Chun." "We sat next to each other," I said, confused by her aggressive tone. "We were just being friendly." "Stay away from her," Cassandra said, her voice low and urgent. "I mean it, Margaret. Don't talk to her, don't call her, don't have anything to do with her." "Why on earth not? She seemed perfectly nice." Cassandra's laugh was sharp and ugly. "Of course she seemed nice to you. That's what she does. She pretends to be your friend while she's gathering information to use against people." "I don't understand." "You don't need to understand," Cassandra interrupted. "You just need to do what I'm telling you. Stay away from Victoria Chun. If she contacts you, don't respond. If you care about maintaining a relationship with your granddaughter, you'll do exactly as I say." The threat was clear and devastating. My access to Emma was entirely at Cassandra's discretion, and she knew it. One word from her to Derek about how I was being difficult or inappropriate, and my already limited visitation would disappear entirely. "Fine," I said quietly, hating myself for capitulating but seeing no other choice. "I won't contact her." "Good," Cassandra said. her expression smoothing back into its usual mask of cold politeness. "I'm glad we understand each other. Now you should get on the road. It's not safe for someone your age to be driving late at night." She walked away, leaving me standing alone in the dark parking lot, trembling with a mixture of anger and despair. I got into my car and sat there for a long moment, trying to compose myself before attempting the long drive home. That's when I noticed the business card was still in my hand. Victoria Chun, partner, Chun and Associates Family Law. I stared at it in the dim light from the school building, thinking about the strange moment when Vicky had realized I was related to Cassandra and Derek, thinking about the weighted way she told me to take care of myself. And suddenly I understood. Victoria Chun wasn't just some random attorney. She knew Derek and Cassandra through business circles, she'd said. But family law attorneys didn't typically interact with real estate developers, unless there was a very specific reason. Unless someone was getting divorced. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Cassandra had recognized Vicky, had been afraid when she saw us sitting together, had threatened me to ensure I wouldn't communicate with her again. Because Victoria Chun wasn't just any family law attorney. She was someone's divorce lawyer. And given Cassandra's panic, I was willing to bet she was Derek's. I drove home that night through the dark highways, my mind spinning with implications and questions. If Derek was planning to divorce Cassandra, why hadn't he told me? We weren't close anymore, but surely something that significant warranted a phone call. Unless he didn't know yet. Unless Cassandra had seen the attorney first. My apartment felt especially small and lonely when I finally got home after 11. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat at my tiny kitchen table, still holding Victoria Chun's business card. Everything in me wanted to call her, to ask what was really happening with my son's marriage. But Cassandra's threat echoed in my mind. If you care about maintaining a relationship with your granddaughter, you'll do exactly as I say. Emma was the only bright spot in my increasingly narrow life. I couldn't risk losing her. So I put the business card in my junk drawer and tried to forget about the mysterious attorney who'd been so kind to me at the school play. But forgetting proved impossible. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed changes in Derek's behavior during our brief phone conversations. He sounded stressed, distracted, more so than usual. When I asked if everything was all right, he gave vague answers about work pressures and difficult clients. Cassandra stopped answering when I called the house, letting everything go to voicemail. My requests to see Emma were met with excuses. She had too much homework, she was coming down with something, they had family plans. I was being frozen out and I didn't understand why. Then, 3 weeks after the school play, Derek showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Saturday afternoon. I was in my gardening clothes, having spent the morning tending the small patio garden that was my primary hobby these days. When I opened the door to find my son standing there looking haggard and defeated, my heart immediately began racing. "What's wrong?" I asked, ushering him inside. "Is Emma okay?" "Emma's fine," Derek said, but his voice was hollow. He sank onto my worn couch like a man who'd been carrying too much weight for too long. "Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not freak out." I sat across from him in my reading chair, hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking. "What is it?" "Cassandra and I are getting divorced," he said bluntly. "Well, she's divorcing me, to be specific. She served me with papers 2 days ago." The shock of hearing it confirmed was still substantial, even though I'd suspected. "Oh, Derek. I'm so sorry. What happened?" He laughed bitterly. "What happened is that my wife of 10 years has apparently been planning her exit strategy for months. She's hired this shark of an attorney, and she's going after everything. The house, half the business, full custody of Emma with me getting supervised visitation only." "Supervised visitation? That's absurd. You're a good father." "Her lawyer is painting me as an absent workaholic who prioritizes business over family," Derek said, running his hands through his hair. "And honestly, Mom, she's not completely wrong. I've been working too much. I've missed a lot of Emma's stuff. But Cassandra encouraged that. She liked the lifestyle my success provided. And now she's using it against me." I processed this, trying to understand. Why would she claim you need supervised visitation? "Because her attorney is vicious," Derek said. "She's finding every mistake I've ever made and twisting it into evidence of negligence or poor judgment. There was an incident a few years ago where I had too much to drink at a business dinner and had to get a ride home. Cassandra's, making it sound like I'm an alcoholic. And there was a time when I was so focused on a big project that I forgot to pick Emma up from school and Cassandra had to leave work to get her. Now I'm a neglectful parent who can't be trusted. But none of that is true in context, I protested. Everyone makes mistakes. Context doesn't matter in divorce court, Derek said wearily. What matters is who has the better lawyer and the better narrative. And right now, Cassandra is winning. He looked at me then really looked at me and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Regret. Maybe even a touch of shame. Mom, I need to ask you something, he said slowly. And I need you to tell me the truth. At Emma's school play, did you meet Cassandra's attorney? My breath caught. I don't know who Cassandra's attorney is. Victoria Chan, Derek said. Apparently one of the best divorce attorneys in the county. Specializes in high-asset cases and has a reputation for absolutely destroying her opposition. Did you talk to her at the play? I sat next to a woman named Victoria Chan, I admitted. We had a nice conversation. I had no idea who she was. Derek leaned forward, suddenly intense. What did you talk about? Did she ask you questions about me or Cassandra? No, I said, trying to remember. We talked about the play, about crime podcasts, about old movies. It was just friendly conversation. She helped me take photos of Emma because my phone doesn't work properly. She helped you, Derek repeated. She was being nice to you. Yes. Why does that matter? Because Victoria Chan doesn't do anything without a reason, Derek said. She knew exactly who you were when she sat next to you. I guarantee it. She was probably gathering information, trying to figure out what kind of witness you'd make. Witness. The word sent a chill through me. In the custody hearing, Derek explained, both sides call character witnesses. People who can testify about what kind of parents we are, what kind of home environment we've created. Cassandra will have her friends and her sister and probably Emma's teachers. I'll need people who can speak to my character, my relationship with my daughter. He paused, looking at me with an expression that was equal parts hope and desperation. I'll need you, Mom. I'll need you to testify about what kind of father I am, about how much I love Emma. The request should have been simple. Of course I'd testify for my son. Of course I'd tell the truth about his love for his daughter. But something made me hesitate. Some small voice in the back of my mind asking questions I wasn't sure I wanted to answer. Derek, I said carefully, if I testify, I have to tell the truth. The whole truth. Of course, he said immediately. That's all I'm asking for. That means I'd have to admit that you work constantly, that you miss a lot of Emma's activities, that Cassandra has been the primary parent for most of Emma's life. Derek's expression faltered. But you'd also say that I love Emma, right? That when I am with her, I'm a good father. Are you? The question came out before I could stop it. Are you a good father when you're with her, Derek? Or are you checking your phone and thinking about work, even when you're supposed to be present? He recoiled as if I'd slapped him. I can't believe you're questioning this. I'm your son. And Emma is my granddaughter, I said, my voice shaking. And I love you both. But if I'm going to testify in court under oath, I need to examine what the truth actually is. The silence between us was heavy and uncomfortable. Derek stood up, his expression hardening into something cold and distant. I guess I know where your loyalty lies, he said quietly. My loyalty is to Emma, I replied, to making sure she ends up in the situation that's truly best for her, not just the situation that's most convenient for the adults. You sound like Cassandra's lawyer, Derek said bitterly. Maybe that's because Cassandra's lawyer is asking the right questions. Derek walked to the door, his movements stiff with anger. I thought I could count on you, Mom. I thought after everything, after Dad left and it was just us, I thought you'd have my back. I do have your back, I said, standing up. But having your back doesn't mean lying for you. It means being honest enough to tell you when you're wrong. I'm not wrong to want to be in my daughter's life. No, I agreed. But you need to be honest about whether you've actually been present in her life up until now, or whether you've just been physically there while your mind was always somewhere else. He left without another word, the door closing with a finality that felt like something breaking. I stood in my small living room, trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline and wondering if I just destroyed my relationship with my son forever. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in years. The sensation of speaking my truth, of not just acquiescing to keep the peace. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. That night I pulled Victoria Chin's business card out of my junk drawer and stared at it for a long time. Then before I could talk myself out of it, I dialed the number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. Victoria's professional recorded voice invited me to leave a message. "Miss Chan, this is Margaret Foster," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We met at Emma's school play. I know you're representing someone in my family, and I know I probably shouldn't be calling, but I think we need to talk. Not about taking sides, but about making sure a little girl doesn't get lost in all of this. Please call me back when you can." I hung up and sat in the darkness of my apartment, wondering what I just set in motion, wondering if I'd made everything better or infinitely worse. The phone rang at 9 the next morning. I barely slept, tossing and turning through the night, second-guessing my decision to reach out to Victoria. When I saw the unfamiliar number on my caller ID, my stomach clenched with anxiety. "Hello. Margaret, it's Victoria Chan. Thank you for calling me yesterday. I think you're right that we should talk." Her voice was warm but professional, the same tone she'd used at the school play. There was no judgment in it, no hint that she thought I'd overstepped by contacting her. "I probably shouldn't have called," I said, suddenly uncertain. "My son came to see me yesterday. He told me you're representing his wife in their divorce." "I am," Victoria confirmed. "And you're right that this puts us in a potentially complicated position. But I want to be very clear about something, Margaret. When I sat next to you at that school play, I genuinely didn't know who you were at first. I recognized Cassandra when she approached you, but our conversation before that was completely authentic. Derek thinks you targeted me," I said quietly. "That you were gathering information." "I understand why he'd think that," Victoria replied. "But I promise you I would never manipulate someone the way you're describing. When I gave you my card and told you to call if you needed anything, I meant it as a human being who'd enjoyed your company, not as an attorney looking for an advantage." I wanted to believe her. Something in my gut said she was telling the truth. "Why did you really call me back?" I asked. "You could have just ignored my message." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Victoria spoke again, her voice had shifted into something more personal, less guarded. "Because in the 30 minutes we talked at that play, you told me things about your life that painted a picture I found concerning. You mentioned you rarely get to see your granddaughter. You implied that your daughter-in-law controls your access to Emma. You described your relationship with your son as strained. Margaret, those are red flags." "Red flags for what?" "For a pattern of isolation and control that often indicates deeper dysfunction in a family system," Victoria said carefully. "Look, I can't discuss my client's case with you. Attorney-client privilege prevents that. But I can tell you, as someone who's spent 20 years working in family law, that what you described isn't healthy. Cassandra doesn't want me around," I said, the words tumbling out. "She thinks I'm an embarrassment. She lives in this perfect world with her perfect house and her perfect life. And I'm this reminder that Derek came from humble beginnings. She spent 10 years trying to erase me from the picture. And Derek let her," Victoria said gently. The truth of it hit me like a punch to the gut. Yes, he let her. "Margaret, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer. In the past few years, how many times have you been allowed to see Emma without supervision? How many times have you been permitted to take her somewhere alone, or have her spend the night at your apartment?" I tried to remember. "Not since she was very small. Maybe when she was 3 or 4. 7 years ago," Victoria said. "For 7 years you've had to see your granddaughter only under the watchful eye of parents who clearly don't trust you with her. Have they ever given you a concrete reason why?" "Cassandra says my apartment isn't safe, that my neighborhood is dangerous, that I'm too old to properly supervise a child. And Derek believes this?" I thought about my son, about the way he'd accepted his wife's version of reality so completely that he'd never questioned whether her restrictions on my access to Emma were reasonable or fair. "Derek believes whatever Cassandra tells him to believe," I said, and hearing myself say it out loud crystallized something I'd been avoiding for years. My son had chosen his wife's comfort over his mother's dignity, over and over again. "Margaret," Victoria said carefully, "I want to meet with you. Not about the case, not about testimony, but because I think you need to understand what's really at stake in this divorce. Can you come to my office tomorrow afternoon?" Every instinct told me to say no, to stay out of it, to protect myself from further entanglement in my son's messy life. But another part of me, the part that had been slowly dying under years of dismissal and disrespect, was desperate to understand what was happening. "Yes," I said. "I'll be there." Victoria's office was in a modern building in downtown Santa Ana, all glass and steel and expensive landscaping. The reception area had that carefully curated aesthetic of success: leather furniture, abstract art, a water feature that babbled soothingly in the corner. I felt profoundly out of place in my discount store clothes and practical shoes. The receptionist, a young man with an elaborate topknot, greeted me warmly and offered me coffee or tea. I accepted water and sat nervously on one of the leather chairs, watching important-looking people stride through the lobby with briefcases and purpose. When Victoria emerged from a hallway, she was dressed in another expensive suit, this one navy blue with subtle pinstripes. But her smile was genuine, and she greeted me with a warmth that immediately put me at ease. "Margaret, thank you so much for coming. Please follow me." Her office was spacious and bright, with windows overlooking the city and bookshelves lined with legal texts and family photos. I noticed a picture of her with an older woman who had Victoria's same smile. Her mother, I guessed. "Please sit," Victoria said, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from her desk. "Can I get you anything else? Are you comfortable?" "I'm fine," I said, though my hands were trembling slightly. "I'm just not entirely sure why I'm here." Victoria sat down and folded her hands on her desk, her expression serious but kind. "You're here because I believe you deserve to know the truth about what's been happening in your son's marriage. Not because it's relevant to my case, but because you're a grandmother who loves her grandchild, and you've been kept in the dark about things that directly affect you." "What things?" Victoria pulled out a folder from her drawer. "Before I show you this, I need you to understand that what I'm about to share isn't privileged information. These are public court documents that anyone could access. I'm not violating any ethical boundaries by sharing them with you, but the content may be difficult to process." She slid the folder across the desk. I opened it with shaking hands and found myself looking at legal documents I didn't fully understand at first. Then certain phrases began to jump out at me. Parental alienation. Systematic isolation of extended family. Pattern of controlling behavior. "I don't understand," I said, looking up at Victoria. "This makes it sound like Cassandra was deliberately keeping me away from Emma." "That's exactly what it sounds like," Victoria said quietly, "because that's exactly what was happening." She pulled out another document. "This is a sworn affidavit from Emma's school counselor. It states that Emma has mentioned multiple times that she wishes she could see her grandmother more often, that she asks about you frequently, and doesn't understand why you don't come to more of her activities." Tears were streaming down my face now. "Emma wants to see me?" "Very much," Victoria confirmed. "According to multiple witnesses, including Emma's teacher and two of her friends' parents, Emma talks about you regularly. She's shown them pictures of you. She's mentioned that her mother doesn't like when she asks about you." But Cassandra said. I stopped realizing. Cassandra lied. About all of it. About Emma not asking for me. About me being a burden. "Yes," Victoria said simply. "She lied. And she used your son's guilt about not being around more to make him complicit in that lie." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. For years, I believed that Emma was better off without me, that my presence in her life was something to be minimized because I wasn't good enough, polished enough, wealthy enough. And it had all been a lie. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why would she do that?" Victoria's expression grew harder, more angry on my behalf than I'd even managed to feel for myself yet. "Because controlling people isolate their victims from support systems. Because your presence in Derek's and Emma's lives represented a reality Cassandra wanted to erase. The reality of where Derek came from, who he was before she molded him into her ideal husband." She paused. "Margaret, I'm going to tell you something else. Something I think you need to know." Cassandra has been having an affair for at least the past 18 months. With a colleague of Derek's, someone he considered a friend. The betrayal was staggering. Derek knows. He found out 2 months ago. That's when Cassandra filed for divorce. She'd been planning it, had consulted with me months earlier, had been transferring money and documenting everything she'd need to paint Derek as an unfit father. The affair was discovered before she was ready, so she accelerated her timeline. I sat back in my chair trying to process the magnitude of what I was learning. My daughter-in-law had spent years systematically destroying my relationship with my son and granddaughter. She'd lied and manipulated and isolated, all while maintaining her perfect facade. What happens now? I asked. That's partially why I wanted to talk to you, Victoria said. In about 3 weeks there will be a custody hearing. Both sides will present evidence about who should have primary custody of Emma. Cassandra is pushing for sole physical custody with Derek, having only supervised visitation. That's not fair, I said immediately. Derek loves Emma. I agree, Victoria said. But loving someone isn't the same as being present for them. Derek has made mistakes, significant ones, in prioritizing work over his daughter. However, I believe those mistakes were enabled and encouraged by Cassandra because his absence served her purposes. She leaned forward. Here's what I need you to understand, Margaret. This case isn't really about who's the better parent between Derek and Cassandra. It's about what situation will actually serve Emma's best interests. And right now, both of her parents have serious issues that need to be addressed. So what's the solution? Honestly, I think Emma needs stability, therapy, and access to a support system that includes you. I think both of her parents need to learn how to put her needs ahead of their egos and their hurt feelings. I think there needs to be shared custody with very clear guidelines about behavior and expectations. Victoria pulled out another document. This is a proposed custody agreement that I think would work. It gives both parents substantial time with Emma, but it also explicitly includes provisions for your relationship with her. Regular scheduled visits, overnight stays, participation in school events and activities. I stared at the document, unable to believe what I was seeing. You're fighting for me to have access to Emma? I'm fighting for Emma to have access to you, Victoria corrected gently. Because despite everything Cassandra claimed, the evidence shows that you're a loving, involved grandmother who was deliberately excluded from your grandchild's life. That's not in Emma's best interest. But you're Cassandra's attorney, I said, confused. Why would you advocate for something that doesn't benefit your client? Victoria smiled. Because my primary obligation isn't to give my client everything she wants. It's to advocate for what's truly best for the child. And sometimes those things aren't the same. She stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the city. I won't lie to you, Margaret. Cassandra is furious about these provisions. She wanted you completely excluded. But I made it clear that if she insisted on that, I couldn't in good conscience continue representing her. The evidence is too strong that parental alienation has occurred, and I won't be party to continuing it. What did she say? But Cassandra said. I stopped realizing. Cassandra lied. About all of it. About Emma not asking for me. About me being a burden. Yes, Victoria said simply. She lied. And she used your son's guilt about not being around more to make him complicit in that lie. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. For years, I believed that Emma was better off without me, that my presence in her life was something to be minimized because I wasn't good enough, polished enough, wealthy enough. And it had all been a lie. Why? I asked, my voice breaking. Why would she do that? Victoria's expression grew harder, more angry on my behalf than I'd even managed to feel for myself yet. Because controlling people isolate their victims from support systems. Because your presence in Derek's and Emma's lives represented a reality Cassandra wanted to erase. The reality of where Derek came from, who he was before she molded him into her ideal husband. She paused. Margaret, I'm going to tell you something else. Something I think you need to know. Cassandra has been having an affair for at least the past 18 months. With a colleague of Derek's, someone he considered a friend. The betrayal was staggering. Derek knows. He found out 2 months ago. That's when Cassandra filed for divorce. She'd been planning it, had consulted with me months earlier, had been transferring money and documenting everything she'd need to paint Derek as an unfit father. The affair was discovered before she was ready, so she accelerated her timeline. I sat back in my chair trying to process the magnitude of what I was learning. My daughter-in-law had spent years systematically destroying my relationship with my son and granddaughter. She'd lied and manipulated and isolated, all while maintaining her perfect facade. What happens now? I asked. That's partially why I wanted to talk to you, Victoria said. In about 3 weeks there will be a custody hearing. Both sides will present evidence about who should have primary custody of Emma. Cassandra is pushing for sole physical custody with Derek, having only supervised visitation. That's not fair, I said immediately. Derek loves Emma. I agree, Victoria said. But loving someone isn't the same as being present for them. Derek has made mistakes, significant ones, in prioritizing work over his daughter. However, I believe those mistakes were enabled and encouraged by Cassandra because his absence served her purposes. She leaned forward. Here's what I need you to understand, Margaret. This case isn't really about who's the better parent between Derek and Cassandra. It's about what situation will actually serve Emma's best interests. And right now, both of her parents have serious issues that need to be addressed. So what's the solution? Honestly, I think Emma needs stability, therapy, and access to a support system that includes you. I think both of her parents need to learn how to put her needs ahead of their egos and their hurt feelings. I think there needs to be shared custody with very clear guidelines about behavior and expectations. Victoria pulled out another document. This is a proposed custody agreement that I think would work. It gives both parents substantial time with Emma, but it also explicitly includes provisions for your relationship with her. Regular scheduled visits, overnight stays, participation in school events and activities. I stared at the document, unable to believe what I was seeing. You're fighting for me to have access to Emma? I'm fighting for Emma to have access to you, Victoria corrected gently. Because despite everything Cassandra claimed, the evidence shows that you're a loving, involved grandmother who was deliberately excluded from your grandchild's life. That's not in Emma's best interest. But you're Cassandra's attorney, I said, confused. Why would you advocate for something that doesn't benefit your client? Victoria smiled. Because my primary obligation isn't to give my client everything she wants. It's to advocate for what's truly best for the child. And sometimes those things aren't the same. She stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the city. I won't lie to you, Margaret. Cassandra is furious about these provisions. She wanted you completely excluded. But I made it clear that if she insisted on that, I couldn't in good conscience continue representing her. The evidence is too strong that parental alienation has occurred, and I won't be party to continuing it. What did she say? She agreed to the visitation provisions, Victoria said. She didn't like it, but she agreed. So if this custody arrangement is approved by the court, you'll have legally protected time with Emma. Cassandra won't be able to keep you away anymore. I couldn't stop crying. For the first time in 10 years, someone was fighting for me. Not asking me to be smaller, quieter, less. Actually fighting for my right to be in my granddaughter's life. I don't know how to thank you, I managed. You don't need to thank me, Victoria said, returning to her seat. But there is something you can do. The court will likely want to hear from you. As a character witness, but also as someone who can speak to the history of family dynamics. Both Derek's attorney and I may call you to testify. I'll tell the truth, I said. Whatever it is, I'll tell the truth. That's all anyone can ask, Victoria said. But I want you to be prepared. The truth might include things that are hard to say out loud. Things about Derek's shortcomings as a father. Things about Cassandra's manipulation. Things about your own pain at being excluded. I'm ready, I said, and I realized I meant it. Victoria walked me to the door, but before I left, she put a hand on my arm. Margaret, I meant what I said at the school play. If you need anything, please call me. Not as an attorney, but as someone who genuinely cares about your well-being. Why? I asked. Why do you care so much about what happens to me? Victoria's expression grew soft and sad. Because my mother is deaf. And when I was growing up, there were people in my family who treated her like she was less than because she was different. They excluded her, talked around her, made her feel invisible. I spent my childhood watching someone I loved be diminished by people who should have protected her. She paused. When I met you at that school play, I saw that same look in your eyes. The look of someone who'd been made to feel invisible by her own family. And I thought, not on my watch. Not if I can help it. I hugged her then, this strong professional woman who'd shown me more care and respect in 2 conversations than my own family had in a decade. She hugged me back, and for a moment I let myself feel hope. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in early December, 2 weeks before Emma's Christmas break. I'd been subpoenaed to testify by Derek's attorney, a polished man named Richard Brandt who'd called me several times to prepare. He'd also warned me that Victoria might call me as well, since I could speak to the history of family dynamics that had led to the current situation. The courthouse was intimidating, all marble and security checks, and people who looked like they belonged in this world of legal proceedings. I dressed in my best outfit, the same navy dress I seemed to wear to every important occasion, and I'd had my hair done at the salon because I wanted to look respectable. Derek was there with his attorney, looking exhausted and years older than he had just months before. Cassandra sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with Victoria, dressed impeccably and wearing an expression of wounded dignity. Looking at her now, knowing what I knew about her manipulations and lies, I wondered how I'd ever been intimidated by her. The hearing took most of the day. Expert witnesses testified about child development and the importance of stable relationships. Emma's teachers spoke about her academic performance and social adjustment. The school counselor presented her observations about Emma's emotional state and her expressed wishes about her family situation. Then it was time for character witnesses. Cassandra's sister testified first, painting Derek as an absent father who prioritized work above all else. Several of Cassandra's friends echoed this narrative, describing a woman who'd sacrificed her own career to be a devoted mother, while her husband was never home. Some of it was true. Derek had worked too much. He had missed important events. But the picture being painted was incomplete, deliberately one-sided. Derek's turn to present witnesses was more complicated. His business partner testified to his work ethic and intelligence. A college friend spoke about Derek's character and integrity. But when it came to speaking about his abilities as a father, the evidence was thinner. That's when Richard Brandt called me to the stand. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and an air of having seen everything, watched me carefully as I was sworn in. Richard approached with a friendly smile, but I could see the calculation behind it. He needed me to say the right things to help his client. Mrs. Foster, can you describe your relationship with your son, Derek? It's complicated, I said honestly. I love my son very much. I raised him alone after his father left when Derek was 14. We were very close when he was growing up, but we've grown apart over the years. Why do you think that distance developed? I glanced at Derek, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Because I wasn't who he needed me to be anymore. I was a reminder of a life he wanted to leave behind. Richard looked slightly thrown by my honesty. But you've remained involved in your grandson Emma's life? Granddaughter, I corrected. Emma is my granddaughter. And no, I haven't been as involved as I would have liked. I've been prevented from having a meaningful relationship with her. By whom? By my daughter-in-law, with my son's complicity. The courtroom was very quiet now. Richard, to his credit, pivoted smoothly. Can you describe what kind of father Derek is when he spends time with Emma? He's loving, I said. When he's present, he's warm and affectionate with her. She clearly adores him. But you said, when he's present. Is he not always present? He's often distracted by work, I admitted. Even when he's physically there, his mind is often elsewhere. Emma has learned to compete with his phone for his attention. I saw Derek's face fall. But I also saw something else, recognition. He knew it was true. Mrs. Foster, Richard said, trying to recover. Despite these concerns, do you believe Derek loves his daughter? Yes, I said firmly. I believe he loves her very much. I also believe he's made significant mistakes in how he's shown that love. But love and good parenting are learnable skills. Derek can do better. The question is whether he will. Richard sat down, looking less than thrilled with my testimony. Then Victoria stood up. Mrs. Foster, she said, her voice gentle, How often over the past 10 years have you been allowed to see Emma without parental supervision? Not at all, I said. Not since she was very young. Has anyone ever given you a concrete reason why you couldn't be trusted alone with your granddaughter? Cassandra said my apartment wasn't safe, that I was too old to properly supervise a child. Is your apartment unsafe? No. It's modest, but it's clean and secure. Are you incapable of supervising a child due to your age? I don't believe so. I'm 73 and in good health. I garden, I drive, I live independently. Victoria paused, letting that sink in. Mrs. Foster, in your honest assessment, why were you really excluded from Emma's life? I looked at Cassandra, at her perfect facade, at the anger simmering behind her eyes. Because I represented something she wanted to erase. I was proof that Derek came from working-class roots, that he wasn't born into the life she wanted him to have. My presence reminded everyone that Derek's success was self-made, that he'd climbed up from humble beginnings. She found that embarrassing. Did she ever say that explicitly? Not in those words. But over the years, she made it clear through countless small comments and actions that I wasn't good enough for her world. And gradually, my son came to accept her version of reality. He stopped fighting for our relationship. He let me become invisible. Victoria nodded slowly. One last question, Mrs. Foster. If you could design the ideal custody arrangement for Emma, what would it look like? I'd thought about this question for weeks, lying awake in my apartment, trying to figure out what was truly best for my granddaughter rather than what was most comfortable for me. I think Emma needs both of her parents, I said. But I think she needs versions of them that are healthier than what she's had. She needs a father who's actually present, not just physically there. She needs a mother who doesn't use her as a weapon or a prize. She needs therapy to process the changes in her family. And she needs access to people who love her unconditionally, including me. Without that access being controlled by parents who are more concerned with hurting each other than protecting her. The courtroom was silent when I finished. I stepped down from the stand feeling exhausted but also strangely peaceful. I told the truth, all of it, even the parts that were hard to say. The judge deliberated for 3 days before issuing her ruling. When the decision came down, everyone was summoned back to the courtroom to hear it read. The custody arrangement was extensive and detailed. Joint physical custody, alternating weeks, with specific provisions for holidays and school breaks. Both parents were required to attend co-parenting therapy. Emma would have her own therapist to help her process the divorce. And buried in the middle of the custody order was a section that brought tears to my eyes. The minor child's relationship with her paternal grandmother, Margaret Foster, shall be protected and encouraged. Mrs. Foster shall have scheduled visitation every other weekend, participation in school events and activities, and regular phone or video contact with the minor child. Neither parent shall interfere with or discourage this relationship. I'd won. Not in the sense that anyone truly wins in divorce court, but I'd won the right to be in my granddaughter's life. Legally protected, no longer subject to Cassandra's whims or Derek's inability to stand up for me. Victoria found me in the hallway afterward, where I was sitting on a bench trying to process what had just happened. Congratulations, Margaret, she said, sitting beside me. You did beautifully on the stand. I'm not sure Derek sees it that way, I said. He'd left the courtroom without speaking to me, though I'd seen the mixture of emotions on his face, hurt, anger, but also something that might have been respect. Derek will need time, Victoria said. Your testimony wasn't what he wanted to hear, but it was what he needed to hear. Sometimes the truth is the most loving thing we can offer someone, even when it hurts. What happens now? I asked. Now Emma has a chance to have healthy relationships with all the people who love her, Victoria said. Including you. That's not nothing, Margaret. That's everything. She stood to leave, then turned back. I meant what I said about staying in touch. I'd love to grab coffee sometime when you're not dealing with the emotional aftermath of family court testimony. I'd like that, I said, and I meant it. My first scheduled visit with Emma was the following Saturday. Derek dropped her off at my apartment with visible reluctance, but he didn't try to interfere. Emma burst through the door with her overnight bag and threw herself into my arms. Grandma, I get to stay the whole weekend. Mom said I have to, but I told her I wanted to anyway. I held her tight, feeling her small warm body against me, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. This was what I'd been missing for so long. This uncomplicated love. This joy at simply being together. What should we do first? I asked. Emma's eyes lit up. Can we make cookies? And can we work on your garden? And can we watch The Wizard of Oz since I was in the play, and you never got to see me practice at home? We can do all of those things, I promised. We spent the weekend baking and gardening and watching movies. Emma told me about school, about her friends, about the book series she was obsessed with. She asked me about my life, about what I did all day, about the flowers I was growing. She wanted to know everything, as if making up for lost time. On Sunday evening, when Derek came to pick her up, Emma hugged me tightly. Can I come back next weekend? Not next weekend, I said, checking the custody schedule. But the weekend after that. I'll count the days, Emma said seriously. After she left, my apartment felt emptier than usual, but it was a different kind of empty than before. Now it was the emptiness of someone who just spent time with a loved one and was looking forward to the next visit, not the emptiness of someone who'd been forgotten. 3 months later, I was planting tomatoes in my patio garden when my phone rang. It was Derek. Hi, Mom, he said, his voice tentative. Hello, Derek. I wondered if maybe we could have coffee sometime, just the two of us. To talk. I sat back on my heels, wiping dirt from my hands. I'd like that. There's something I need to say, he continued. Something I should have said in court, but I was too angry and hurt to manage it then. What's that? You were right. About all of it. I was a terrible father in a lot of ways. I let Cassandra isolate you from Emma because it was easier than standing up to her. I prioritized work over my daughter. I turned you into someone to be ashamed of instead of someone to be proud of. His voice cracked. And I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for all of it. Tears were running down my face, but my voice was steady. I'm sorry too. Sorry I didn't speak up sooner. Sorry I let myself become invisible. You're not invisible, Derek said firmly. Not anymore. Emma talks about you constantly. About your garden and your cooking and how you actually listen when she talks. You're teaching me what it means to be present for someone. Even now, even after everything. It's not too late, I told him. It's never too late to start doing better. We met for coffee that week, and then again the next week, and gradually something new began to form between us. Not the old relationship we'd had when I was a struggling single mother, and he was a boy who needed me desperately. Something more balanced, more honest. A relationship between two adults who were learning how to respect each other's truth. Victoria and I did have that coffee she'd suggested, and then another, and eventually she became someone I considered a genuine friend. She introduced me to other women her mother's age, members of the deaf community who embraced me as someone who understood their language and their challenges. Through the Patterson Morrison Foundation, no connection to my story, just a coincidence I found amusing. I began volunteering, using my modest skills to help others. A year after the custody hearing, Emma's school held another play. This time it was Annie, and Emma had the role of one of the orphans. I sat in the auditorium in my usual cream cardigan, but this time I wasn't alone. Derek sat on one side of me, and surprisingly Victoria sat on the other, her nephew having a small role as well. When Emma appeared on stage, she scanned the audience until she found me, and her whole face lit up with joy. She waved, breaking character completely, and I waved back, no longer caring about being invisible or proper or small. Cassandra was there too, sitting several rows ahead with her new boyfriend. She'd moved on quickly after the divorce, and while Derek was still processing everything that had happened, he seemed lighter somehow, freer. After the play, Emma ran up to me, still in her orphan costume. Did you see me, Grandma? I remembered all my lines. You were perfect, I told her, pulling her into a hug. Can we go get ice cream? She asked. All of us? You and Daddy and me. Derek looked at me uncertainly, and I nodded. Ice cream sounds perfect. As we walked out of the school together, my son, my granddaughter, and me, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago. The one who'd felt invisible and worthless, who'd accepted other people's assessments of her value as truth. That woman was gone. In her place was someone who knew her worth, who'd learned to speak her truth even when it was uncomfortable, who discovered that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept less than you deserve. Victoria-chan had been right that night at the school play when she told me to take care of myself. She'd seen what I couldn't see then, that I was worth caring for, worth fighting for, worth protecting. And in learning to see my own value, I'd given Emma something more precious than any custody arrangement could guarantee. I'd shown her what it looked like to stand up for yourself, to tell the truth even when it's hard, to believe that you deserve love and respect not because of what you can provide, but simply because of who you are. The ice cream shop was crowded, but we found a small table in the corner. Emma chattered happily about the play while Derek and I exchanged tentative smiles across the table. We had a long way to go, both of us, in learning how to be family to each other again. But for the first time in years, I believed it was possible. Because I'd learned the most important lesson of all. You can't build genuine relationships on a foundation of making yourself smaller. Real love, real family requires that everyone involved be fully present, fully themselves, fully seen. And I was done being invisible. 2 years had passed since that transformative custody hearing, and the changes in our family dynamic continued to unfold in ways I never could have anticipated. Emma was now in 5th grade, thriving academically and emotionally in a way that filled me with profound gratitude. The consistent therapy she'd been receiving had helped her process the divorce with remarkable maturity for a child her age. My relationship with Derek had evolved into something I'd stopped hoping for years ago. We'd established a rhythm of weekly dinners at my apartment, where he'd arrive with groceries and we'd cook together while discussing everything from Emma's upcoming science fair project to his struggles with finding balance between work and fatherhood. He'd made genuine changes, turning down projects that would have required excessive travel, and implementing strict boundaries around his work hours. The transformation wasn't perfect, but it was real. What surprised me most was the unexpected friendship that had blossomed between Victoria and me. She'd introduced me to a world I never knew existed, inviting me to gallery openings and book clubs, treating me not as a charity case but as an equal whose perspective she genuinely valued. Through her connections, I'd started volunteering at a nonprofit that helped elderly individuals navigate legal systems, using my own experience to guide others who felt lost and powerless in family court situations. The work gave me purpose beyond being Emma's grandmother. I discovered that my years of feeling dismissed and invisible had actually equipped me with unique empathy for others in similar situations. The seniors I helped often told me I understood them in ways their own families didn't. That validation, earned through service rather than family obligation, meant everything. Emma's relationship with Cassandra had stabilized into something functional if not warm. Cassandra had remarried quickly, and her new husband brought 2 teenage children from his previous marriage. The expanded household meant Emma was no longer the sole focus of her mother's controlling tendencies, which paradoxically improved their dynamic. Cassandra seemed more relaxed, less invested in maintaining perfect appearances now that she had a new audience to impress. During one of Emma's weekend visits, she confided something that both broke and healed my heart. We were working in the garden, her small hands covered in soil as she helped me plant marigolds around the tomato plants. "Grandma," she said thoughtfully, "I'm glad you told the truth in court that day." I paused, surprised she remembered the hearing with such clarity. "You are. Mom told me you said mean things about Daddy. But I asked Daddy what you really said, and he told me you said the truth even though it was hard. He said that's what brave people do." Emma looked up at me with those serious eyes that always seemed older than her years. "I want to be brave like that too. I want to tell the truth even when it's scary." I set down my trowel and pulled her close, not caring about the dirt transferring from her clothes to mine. "You're already the bravest person I know, sweet girl. And the truth is what kept our family together, even when it felt like it might tear us apart." That evening, after Derek picked Emma up, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this place. The woman who'd sat in that school auditorium 2 years ago, feeling invisible and worthless, seemed like a different person now. Not because my circumstances had changed dramatically. I still lived in the same modest apartment, still drove the same old car, but because my understanding of my own worth had fundamentally shifted. Victoria had taught me that dignity isn't something others grant you. It's something you claim for yourself by refusing to accept treatment that diminishes you. The custody arrangement hadn't just given me access to Emma, it had given me back myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Mom, thank you for everything you do for Emma. And for me. I know I don't say it enough, but I see you now. Really see you. And I'm proud to be your son. I read the message 3 times, tears blurring my vision. Redemption, I'd learned, doesn't arrive in grand gestures. It comes in small moments of recognition, in gradual shifts toward mutual respect, in the daily choice to show up honestly rather than hide behind convenient fictions. The next morning brought an unexpected phone call from Richard Brandt, Derek's divorce attorney. His voice carried an excitement I'd never heard during the tense months of legal proceedings. Mrs. Foster, I hope I'm not calling too early. I have news that I thought you'd want to hear immediately. The State Bar Association is hosting a panel discussion next month on family law reform, specifically addressing parental alienation and grandparents' rights. They've asked me to participate, and I'd like to invite you to join the panel as well. I nearly dropped the phone. Me? But I'm not a lawyer. I don't have any credentials. You have something more valuable than credentials, Richard said firmly. You have lived experience and the courage to speak truth to power. Your testimony in Derek's case has become something of a reference point in our legal community. Other attorneys have cited it when arguing for more robust protection of grandparent-grandchild relationships. The idea terrified me. Speaking in front of a room full of legal professionals about the most painful period of my life seemed like volunteering for public humiliation. But I thought about Emma's words in the garden. I want to be brave like that too. When is it? I asked, my voice shaking slightly. 3rd Thursday of next month. I'll email you all the details. And Mrs. Foster? Thank you for considering this. Your voice matters more than you know. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my cooling coffee, trying to process this new development. Victoria called 20 minutes later, having already heard about the panel invitation through the legal grapevine. You're going to say yes, right? She asked without preamble. Because you absolutely should. The family law system needs to hear from people who've navigated it, not just the attorneys who profit from it. What if I freeze up? What if I can't articulate what I want to say? Then you'll be human, Victoria said gently. Margaret, perfectionism is just another way of making yourself small. You don't need to be eloquent. You just need to be honest. With her encouragement and Derek's enthusiastic support, I agreed to join the panel. The weeks leading up to the event were consumed by preparation. Richard sent me reading materials about proposed legislative reforms. Victoria helped me organize my thoughts into coherent talking points. Derek practiced interview questions with me during our weekly dinners, pushing me to speak more boldly than felt comfortable. Emma, when she learned about the panel, declared she wanted to attend. Cassandra initially refused, citing school obligations, but Derek advocated for Emma's participation with a firmness I'd never seen him display with his ex-wife before. Eventually, Cassandra relented, perhaps recognizing she'd already lost too many battles by being unreasonable. The morning of the panel, I woke at 5 with butterflies rioting in my stomach. I'd bought a new dress for the occasion. Nothing expensive, but something that made me feel confident rather than apologetic. Victoria picked me up at 9, and we drove to the convention center where the State Bar Association was holding its annual conference. The panel room was enormous, with tiered seating that stretched back into shadows. As people filtered in, I recognized several faces from Derek's custody hearing, opposing attorneys, expert witnesses, even the judge who'd issued the final ruling. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Breathe, Victoria whispered beside me on the panel stage. You've already survived the hard part. This is just telling people about it. The moderator introduced each panelist, listing their impressive credentials and accomplishments. When she reached me, her introduction was simple but powerful. And finally, Margaret Foster, whose testimony in Castellano versus Castellano has become a touchstone for authenticity in family court proceedings. I scanned the audience and found Derek and Emma sitting in the 3rd row. Emma gave me an enthusiastic thumbs up. Derek's eyes were already glistening with unshed tears. The discussion began with technical questions about legal standards and evidentiary requirements. I listened as attorneys debated procedural reforms and custody evaluation protocols, feeling increasingly out of place among these educated professionals. Then the moderator turned to me. Mrs. Foster, could you describe what it felt like to be systematically excluded from your granddaughter's life? What was the emotional impact of that alienation? The room grew quiet. I looked at Emma, at her eager face waiting to hear my story. I thought about all the other grandparents sitting in similar audiences, wondering if their experiences mattered. It felt like dying while still breathing, I said slowly. Every holiday that passed without seeing Emma, every birthday I wasn't invited to, every school event I missed. It was like watching my own relevance disappear. I started believing what I was told, that I wasn't good enough, that my presence was somehow harmful rather than helpful. My voice grew stronger as I continued. But what hurt most wasn't just losing access to my granddaughter. It was losing my sense of self. I'd spent 30 years sacrificing for my son, working multiple jobs to give him opportunities, putting his needs ahead of my own. And when he married someone who found me embarrassing, he let her erase me. Not all at once, but gradually, through 1,000 small dismissals that added up to invisibility. I paused, gathering courage for what came next. The truth is, the family court system initially felt like just another place where I'd be dismissed. Another institutional setting where educated professionals would look at my discount store clothes and my working-class background and decide I wasn't worth protecting. I almost didn't fight for my relationship with Emma because I'd internalized the message that I didn't deserve it. What changed? The moderator asked gently. I looked at Victoria. Someone saw me. Really saw me. Not as a case file or a problem to be managed, but as a human being whose pain mattered. Victoria-chan treated me with dignity before I'd reclaimed it for myself. She fought for my relationship with Emma not because it benefited her client, but because it was right. The audience was utterly silent now. I could see people in the back rows leaning forward to hear better. I think the family court system needs more of that. I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Less focus on winning and losing, more focus on protecting relationships that matter. My granddaughter needed me in her life. I needed her in mine. That truth should have been obvious from the beginning. But it took months of legal proceedings and thousands of dollars to establish what should have been a given right. The moderator nodded thoughtfully. What would you say to other grandparents facing similar situations? I thought carefully before responding. I'd say that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you. I'd say that speaking your truth, even when it's uncomfortable, is the most loving thing you can do for your grandchildren. And I'd say that you deserve to fight for those relationships, regardless of whether anyone else thinks you're entitled to them. The panel continued for another hour, with technical discussions about proposed legislation and procedural reforms. But the energy in the room had shifted after my testimony. Attorneys who'd seemed detached and academic were now engaged with visible emotion, asking questions about how to better serve families, rather than just process cases efficiently. During the break, I was surrounded by people wanting to share their own stories. A grandmother from Sacramento who'd been denied access to her grandchildren for 3 years. An attorney who'd lost a case similar to Derek's and wanted to know how Victoria had structured her arguments differently. A family court judge who admitted she'd sometimes dismiss grandparents' concerns as meddling rather than recognizing them as legitimate stakeholders in children's lives. Emma pushed through the crowd and wrapped her arms around my waist. Grandma, you were so brave. Everyone was crying. Derek appeared behind her, his face wet with tears he wasn't bothering to hide. Mom, I had no idea. I mean, I knew intellectually what had happened, but hearing you describe it that way. He couldn't finish the sentence. I pulled him close, this son who'd hurt me so deeply and was working so hard to make amends. We're here now, I said simply. That's what matters. After the conference ended, Victoria and I went to dinner at a small Italian restaurant she loved. We'd barely ordered when she raised her wine glass. To Margaret Foster, she said formally, who taught me that the best advocacy comes from genuine compassion, not legal maneuvering. You gave me my life back. I said, my throat tight. How do I ever thank you for that? You already have, Victoria said. You used what happened to you to help others. You turned pain into purpose. That's the greatest gratitude anyone could offer. As we ate, I reflected on the unlikely friendship we'd formed. Victoria, with her expensive education and professional success. Me, with my working-class background and limited formal schooling. On paper, we shouldn't have connected. But trauma and triumph had created a bond that transcended superficial differences. I've been thinking about something, Victoria said as we shared tiramisu. My practice has been growing, and I'm considering bringing on a victim advocate. Someone who can work with clients who feel intimidated by the legal system, who can translate the process into human terms. Would you be interested? I stared at her. You want to hire me? I want to partner with you, Victoria corrected. You have skills that can't be taught in law school. The ability to make people feel seen and heard. The wisdom that comes from lived experience. I think you could transform how we serve families going through divorce. The offer hung in the air between us. A year ago, I would have immediately dismissed it as charity, as something I wasn't qualified for. But I'd learned enough about my own worth to recognize that Victoria was offering a genuine opportunity, not a pity position. Can I think about it? I asked. Take all the time you need, Victoria said warmly. The position will exist whenever you're ready for it. I drove home that night feeling like I was floating. The panel had been terrifying but exhilarating. Victoria's job offer was unexpected but exciting. Emma's pride in me had been the validation I'd spent my whole life seeking. My phone rang as I pulled into my apartment complex. It was Derek. Mom, I know it's late, but I wanted to say something while it's fresh in my mind. Today, hearing you speak at that panel, I finally understood what I put you through. Not just intellectually, but emotionally. I let Cassandra make you feel worthless because it was easier than standing up to her. I chose my own comfort over your dignity. Derek. Please let me finish. I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't think I deserve it yet. But I want you to know that I see you now. The woman who worked 3 jobs to send me to college. The woman who learned sign language to care for her mother. The woman who had the courage to tell the truth in court, even when it might have cost her everything. You're not an embarrassment, Mom. You're extraordinary. And I'm sorry it took me losing almost everything to realize that. After we hung up, I sat in my car with tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness but tears of release. The validation I'd been seeking had finally arrived, not because I'd changed who I was, but because others had finally learned to see me clearly. Over the following months, I accepted Victoria's offer and began working as a family advocate at her firm. The job was part-time and paid modestly, but it gave me purpose and structure. Helped frightened parents navigate custody evaluations. I sat with anxious grandparents preparing testimony. I translated legal jargon into language normal people could understand. The work was emotionally exhausting but deeply fulfilling. I discovered that my years of feeling powerless had actually prepared me perfectly for this role. I could spot the same self-doubt in others that I'd carried for so long. I could challenge the internalized belief that working-class people didn't deserve the same justice as wealthy ones. Emma continued to thrive, splitting her time between Derek's house and Cassandra's with increasing maturity. She developed a fascination with social justice, telling me during one of our weekend visits that she wanted to become a civil rights attorney when she grew up. Like Victoria, she explained, but specifically helping kids whose families are broken. Because I know what that feels like, and I want to make sure other kids have someone fighting for them. I felt my heart expand with pride. Emma was learning that pain could be transformed into purpose, that vulnerability could become strength. She was learning lessons I'd only recently discovered myself. On the anniversary of the custody hearing, Derek hosted a small dinner party at his house. Victoria came along with Richard Brandt and a few of Derek's close friends. It wasn't a celebration of the divorce but rather an acknowledgement of how far we'd all traveled since that dark period. Emma insisted on making a toast, standing on a chair so everyone could see her. I want to thank Grandma for being brave. She told the truth even when it was hard. She fought for me when I didn't even know I needed fighting for. And she taught me that love means showing up even when no one invites you. As we raised our glasses, I caught Derek's eye across the table. He mouthed the words "thank you," and I nodded, accepting his gratitude while releasing the resentment I'd carried for so long. Because I'd finally learned the most important truth of all. You can't control how others see you, but you can control how you see yourself. And when you know your own worth, when you refuse to accept treatment that diminishes you, you create space for others to rise to your standards rather than dragging you down to theirs. I was no longer the invisible woman in the discount dress, shrinking myself to fit other people's narrow expectations. I was Margaret Foster, survivor and advocate, grandmother and friend, Someone whose voice mattered precisely because I'd learned to use it. And I was done apologizing for taking up space in the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.